Welcome back to the Backseat Startup Podcast, where we give unsolicited advice to strangers on the internet.
Today I'm joined by Brett Calhoun, the Managing Director and Partner at Scale. Brett, thank you so much for being on the show. Can you share a little bit more about your background?
Luke, thanks for having me on the show too. Yeah, so currently Managing Director and Partner at Scale. Prior was in the accounting and finance space, the whole CPA route. Quickly realized was not for my personality. Got into doing more creative finance things like valuation work for sell-side M&A and litigation. Then ended up getting into the whole startup world. Had an opportunity to work with a fund in grad school at Mizzou, where we're investing in Missouri operators, and absolutely fell in love with that. Just the environment, the passion, and the support that you're able to provide by helping founders get access to resources to make their dreams come to fruition. After that, worked with a startup called Patient, which was one of our portfolio companies there. It's a fintech healthcare company based in Columbia, Missouri, but a Series C company now. Went on to work with a legal tech fund and then co-founded two fintech startups, one in the tax space and one in lending. The lending one, we grew to about $1 million in ARR in 12 months. So kind of all this finance, operating experience, investing has kind of led into what we do at Scale, which is not just investing, but also working on the front lines with early stage founders from idea to early traction stage.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. If you are a startup who is looking to raise money, certainly check out Scale. They have great resources. They have great people, a great team, and really excited to chat with you today while we give unsolicited advice to strangers on the internet. So for this show, we will head over to Reddit, the r/startup subreddit. We will find a question posed by a founder, and you and I will give our thoughts. How about the pitching and presenting? I feel like that's a pretty common question that gets asked. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I will read it for the sake of the listeners. So this post is titled, "How do you get better at pitching/presenting? Wondering how you guys have approached improving your pitch, especially over Zoom. Obviously, practice makes perfect, but would welcome any other suggestion. Books, tips that worked for you, things you learned from good/bad experiences, etc. We raised a small pre-seed round Q3 of last year, but we will be going out to the market again in a few weeks, trying to get my head ready for discussion with angels and VCs. Thank you all in advance." So just at a general note, what do you think of this post?
Yeah, I think, well, one, we can talk about techniques to improve pitching and presenting, but also I think you need to start with a mindset around pitching and presenting, because it's not like, hey, I raised a pre-seed round last quarter, and then next quarter we're going to put our stake in the ground again and start fundraising and just going around and doing the whole pitching carousel, because it's not really how things work. I feel like it's a little bit more informal than what this person's perception on fundraising is. It's more so around building relationships long term and starting those relationships prior to really needing to raise that capital. And over time, you're getting feedback and updating these investors on what's happening with your company, and never actually get into a point where you're pitching. It's more so building excitement, showing somebody your ability to execute on targets that you told them 6 months ago. And then you finally get to a point where you have all these really good relationships in the industry, and people will start, asking you about investing in your company, even if you're not raising. You can start pitting these investors up against each other. It's the whole game of raising funding in VC. So I would think less around like pitching like you're going to a demo day, more around thinking about the process first. But before I jump into my thoughts on techniques with pitching, I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of gold in there, and I want to ask you a couple of follow-up questions on that. So first of all, I love the advice that you gave about this should be a relationship building process, and you should start before you're even raising capital, before you need capital. What would the ideal outreach look like? So if you knew that you had to raise in, call it 6 months or so, and you've identified partners that you would love to work with in terms of investors, how would you recommend that founders, A, find those investors to reach out to, and what does that early communication look like?
Yep. So one, obviously you want to start with your network, anybody you immediately know, and then anybody you immediately know knows. Beyond there, if you don't have any investor contacts, so maybe you're from Columbia, Missouri, and you've never met a VC before, you've never met somebody that has talked to somebody in the industry. Also, when saying VC, these are not people like sitting on a throne who are smarter than everybody. They're simply just somebody who either organically or, was trying to break into this industry, and they're the same level of intelligence, if not less, than the person sitting across the table. I feel like people tend to have a mindset that is very exclusive, and these person are just like so intelligent, all this stuff. Most of them haven't even built companies before. I've done some early companies, but nothing to the point of massive success. So I think one, you want to get that mindset out of your head. And then actually reaching out to investors. Let's just, for example, say that you don't have an immediate network. You definitely want to go about it similar to like if you're in college and you're trying to reach out to an alumni or somebody, looking for mentorship. You probably want to take the angle of like, hey, I've got this idea. This is what we're doing. This is what I've done. Would love to get your feedback and just pick your brain. Not, hey, we're raising $1 million. Can we talk? We're trying to close this next month. That doesn't really the only pressure it gives me is the fact that you put a date on it, but I know nothing about your company, so the date is actually probably a negative thing. So I would definitely go about it as more feedback, mentorship. Maybe it's even trying to get some network effects out of it. I don't know, but that's how I would go about it.
Yeah, that's great advice. And this next bit is going to be not particularly helpful to the poster because it's kind of retroactive advice, but hopefully they encountered some founder or investors in their pre-seed round that passed for one reason or another. And it's so important to maintain those relationships and have very gracious responses when investors pass, because sometimes it's a case of, not right now, we want to see more traction, things like that. And that's a great opportunity to say hey, look how far we've come since the last time I reached out. We've accomplished X, Y, and Z milestones. We're looking to raise again. I'm hoping to be able to sit down with you. So I guess moving forward, this poster, anyone you're talking to in this next raise, make sure you kind of keep those lines of communication open. Brett, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, but it can be something as simple as, if an investor passes, ask if you can continue to keep them updated. You can add them to the email list and update them like you would your investors that actually do end up investing. But I'm curious to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, I normally ask founders to add me to their update list. I would suggest doing that on a monthly cadence. Some people do it weekly or bi-weekly. I just think that's too much. It's just going to get lost. So yeah, it's also a good exercise too to kind of keep yourself up to date on what's happening and writing down your milestones and writing down if you hit them or not. I would also say too, if you do have investors that pass on you, that it's either, you can either get good feedback out of it, improve upon what you did wrong, or it's two, in some cases, it's every investor has a finite amount of capital, and it feels like you have an infinite amount of deals to invest in. And so whether it's biased towards certain deals or, it's just they hit the absolute gold mine with deal flow that month, or then why they pass in your company. It's not always that you have a bad opportunity. It's every investor's filter is not perfect. They're going to oftentimes turn down really good companies and pick average ones. So, it's not always your fault if you were turned down
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And so you were alluding to this earlier that you had some thoughts about kind of the procedure and how you should actually approach the pitch. But it kind of sounds like, from your perspective, if you're emphasizing that building those relationships, I guess when it comes to the quote unquote pitch, when you're actually making the ask, do you prefer that to be more of just an open discussion and conversation, or do you like a polished and rehearsed pitch going slide by slide?
Um, yeah, this my opinion might be different than the industry, but I hate pitches. I feel like I'm sitting in a class and with somebody with a low attention span, I'm not going to sit there for 20 or 30 minutes and like I don't want to like I understand there's a lot of passion and everything with the pitch, but would rather have a conversation and really dig into why the person started the company and what it is, as opposed to letting someone ramble on about the business. I feel like it's a little bit more engaging and insightful doing it that way. Um, so tend to not even look at decks. Only use them in meetings if you need to reference something in the deck, and it's good to have like a visual or something. That would be my general opinion with pitches.
And I imagine the average founder will come across investors who prefer it your way, open conversations, just kind of a dialogue, asking questions and things like that. And then some who are fine with going slide by slide. So in terms of this poster asking how to get their head right, how would you prepare for both of those types? Because you might not know when you log onto the Zoom or what have you, if it's going to be, a discussion or a formal presentation. And beyond just, knowing your numbers forward and back, so you can you can ask your questions or tell them you will get responses to those questions shortly, things like that. How would you advise a founder to prepare for the multiple types of meetings that they might encounter?
Yeah, so I think it says a lot for somebody who's prepared and is not prepared. As somebody who's going to operate a business, you need to have a lot of discipline. And these are just little data points to show whether you do or not. So I think you should be, the business like the back of your hand. So getting ready for off the cuff presentation or a conversation shouldn't be something hard. You should always be prepared for that. In addition to always having a data room ready if somebody asks for it. There's another data point to say, hey, is this person organized, prepared, disciplined, all those things. Preparing for pitches, if you're going to do a formal presentation, deck walkthrough, you definitely want to keep it short and sweet, 10 minutes or less. Less words are always better. Always say more with less words. Simple, does your grandma understand the pitch? I think is a good line to stick by. And really digging into the story and the emotions of the presentation, I think, are very important. Getting to the point, I think a lot of you see this a lot where it's like somebody has, let's say you have a 20-minute presentation, but 8 minutes is on the problem. It's like, well, if you cut that down to like 1 minute, have one slide, just highlight the things that are that go straight to the point, not this whole rambled story. And so another thing too is digging into, you see a lot of decks or presentations that talk about the product that's being built, as opposed to actually, you think you're talking about the solution, but you're just talking about the features. And it's actually going a little bit deeper than that and talking about this is the output of the product, not this is what my product does. So I think showing like, hey, this was the current workflow with this process or this, whatever it is, and then enter my product. This is now the current workflow, and this is how someone's life has been enhanced because of my business. And if we didn't have this business, you'd go back to having this awful lifestyle. And so I think those are like really important and often get missed.
I'm really glad that you touched on the subtle difference between the solution and your product, because the solution, well, I guess I'll phrase this another way. Your product, you could have multiple products solving the same solution. Like, for example, if you are a fusion energy company, let's say, and your solution that you're proposing is solving the energy crisis with fusion energy, and your product is the Fusion Machine 3000. You could pivot to another machine or a different process for capturing that sort of energy while still solving the same solution. And I think it's a big mistake that founders make to kind of blend those two. And would you say that should usually result in two separate slides, a kind of traditional solution slide and also the product, your current iteration of the product?
Yep, totally agree. There are definitely two separate slides, solution, product. That's how we always talk to our founders about building out their decks. So.
That's great advice. And then you had mentioned a little earlier, always make sure that your data room is ready to go. And I'm really glad you touched on that non-presentation kind of factor of it. So this founder is getting ready for another round of financing, preparing mentally for all that accompanies that. What other advice do you have just to get your affairs in order that's not necessarily preparing for the pitch, nailing your deck and everything like that, in terms of like corporate hygiene or procedural things that you need to check the boxes for before you head into fundraise?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just being organized on a, real-time basis, not scrambling to put things together before a fundraise. It's like, why would you not just continuously do that and update it? Like, similar, okay, this is kind of a metaphor, but with your pitch deck, similar to a data room, you, through the process of, let's say, over a 12-month period of time, you might be using that deck for different things, but from January till December, your business is probably quite a bit different. So you want to change the pitch deck on a continuous basis. You don't want to present your January pitch deck in December. Same thing as the data room. So you're constantly updating that, just like you're constantly updating the data room. I think just in general, it's just a good practice to have discipline and organization with those things.
Yeah, if you are a founder that all of your documents are still somewhere in your inbox, please from the outset create a data room. You are doing yourself no favors trying to assemble that at the end. And similar for the pitch deck, I think if you only update your pitch deck when it comes time to fundraising, you can miss a lot of the iterative process of changing little things as your narrative develops. And I think you can kind of lose sight of it because so much of pitching is explaining your narrative and storytelling and everything like that. And I think if you skip a lot of those steps in the middle, it can lead to a less fleshed out story when it actually comes time to fundraising.
Yep, completely agree.
So do you have any parting wisdom for this founder that we haven't covered?
Parting wisdom would be, well, they already raised it. I was going to say, come talk to me, but they've already raised the pre-seed round. Might be a little bit further along. If they're getting ready for a pre-seed round, I would just suggest to start networking with people now.
Yeah, perfect advice. Well, you're welcome for the unsolicited advice. Brett, thank you so much for being on the show. How can listeners connect with you?
Connect with me, Brett, at scale-vc.com. That's BRETT at scale-vc.com, or LinkedIn, Brett Calhoun, or Twitter. But email is definitely always open.
Perfect. Well, you heard him. Go check out those resources. Go check out scale.com if you are in the pre-seed fundraising mode. And Brett, I really appreciate the advice you had for this founder, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Luke. It was fun.
Yep, take care. Thanks.
The Backseat Startup Podcast is brought to you by Startup Founder Daily, a media company focused on early-stage companies. To learn more or apply to be featured for free, head over to startupfounderdaily.com. You can find the link in the description below.